It's in the Hall of Fame for sure.
We should talk about G2, obviously, because like this is a team that came out looking pretty good after MSI. Obviously had a very bizarre MSI run of powering up, then completely getting shit on. And then they spend a lot of this split being kind of terrible. And then they end the split on a 5-game win streak, beating the team in first place to take first place, guarantee their qualification for Worlds, returning to form at the exact right time. So what are your impressions of G2 and how they got themselves back into shape? Amazing.
I mean, it's actually hard to pin. Like again, like it's the same thing as with most other teams. It's hard to pinpoint, but it seems to be that they, like in the earlier part of the split, whenever they made a play, it felt like that there was like the potential for it to go very wrong, and the game flow was really like relying on them like making way more plays and really getting caps ahead, especially. But nowadays, it feels like there's like a fluid motion in their play, even with Flacket and Flacket Tagamas don't really form up to standards, which. At this point, you don't really expect them to be like the best bot lane in any way. They still seem to be like well-oiled machine around the top side of the map. So I don't know. I think it might have just been lagging behind from MSI, whatever it is, or them not having adjusted to the meta yet. But now it's simply like a well-oiled machine. I think there's nothing that I can say that I would be like, man, this is it. Junkos is probably like the biggest, I guess, difference to earlier in the split, where he actually seems to find more positive plays instead of just running it down. And he has like his niche champion pool that no other player shares either, where he's actually proficient on Jarvan, he's actually proficient on Pantheon, and no other player like in the league has that kind of weird champion pool to draw back from, at least from back in the days when he was on G2 in 2019, 2020, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how G2 actually ended up in first place. I'm looking at the rule book at the moment. I think what it is that they had a better second half. Yeah, which I actually, as a tiebreaker, I actually like that, because I think you should prefer to have the team that's had a better record in the second round robin if they are tied 1-1 in the head-to-head. I think, it's difficult to have tiebreakers in League of Legends because you don't have things like round differential like you do in Counter-Strike in order to, game
That's
time.
Shit in Counter-Strike, I will say.
It's better than game time in League of Legends. Right?
Debatably.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think this is a pretty good tiebreaker, so you don't actually have to play the tiebreaker match.
Not the only one who has missed the obvious point here. Oh, what angle could we pick from the games they've already played that would decide which one of them wins? Well, it's a tie, isn't it? So no, but then let's make sense. Logically, the game rewards one thing. Did you win or lose the game? It doesn't say, sorry, you won the game in twice as long, you're not as good. You're doing tiebreakers, though. That's why all the tiebreakers in the league fucking suck. The reason why this one's okay is this, Monte, because this was just deciding seeding. It was for the top spot of the league. If it's for a scenario like to make the playoffs, it has to be a real match you have to play. You can't then go, right, well, they won like off a different opponent that isn't you on like week 7 and you didn't. Like,
yeah, I meant to go.
What are you talking about? Why would that matter? What the fuck are you talking about? We're talking about these two teams. So I think you have to play the match personally. I think this way it worked out perfectly, because the G2 one, like I say, it was just for first place, and then the other one, XL Fnatic, was actually make the playoffs. Like that would make sense.
I'm just trying to remember the games that G2 played, especially like when they started their win streak. I remember them coming to their own again, like especially against Mad Lions, and I think it's Fnatic. Like it's more like that they were able to really utilize and understand like when enemies were misstepping. I think early in the split they never knew when enemies were actually making mistakes. So on the macro level they were not really punishing it, and they kind of allowed teams get away with it. And then on the second half of the split, as it became better and better, especially against Mad Lions, it showed they knew when enemy was overstepping. They knew when enemy did too much, and then they suddenly like were able to strike at the right times and utilize mid powers a lot more efficiently. I think Caps and Junglers, I think the two ones that stepped up the most out of all, because Broken Blade was kind of decent to begin with, like in the split, and Targamas and Flacket were whatever anyway. But Caps and Junglers, like they suddenly identified how to play around mid power and how to utilize Caps as like just like a map roamer again, right? Like which is his playstyle. I think the meta shift kind of suited them a lot, especially going back to Poppy, Jarvan, Pantheon, whatever it is, right? Like these champions do suit junglers a lot more, being creative, like being able to make plays instead of having to be stuck in the jungle, farming and doing nothing, right? So I think that it's just a multitude of reasons, but I think with jungle, I think with jungle and really having the jungle pool kind of cater to junglers again.
I mean, I like the fact that they've been able to take some more aggressive picks like the Draven in the early game and really successfully snowball off of it. It feels like G2 really wants to be aggro in the early game, and part of that's coming through, Broken Blade playing lane bullies like Yone or like these aggressive like carry picks in the top side, and then also having auto priority on the bot side, because the thing about having the Draven or something like the Draven or the Kalista is that it allows you to basically instantly have that priority against some of these scaling AD carries, and then you can choose to play around it or not, or you can visit the top side, right? If your bot lane's being careful, if you're the jungler, try and get Broken Blade ahead. So they've been really good at snowballing some of these early game advantages that they had, and it's also now drawing bans against them. Like, some teams in this meta demand the Draven ban. Like T1 is one of those teams. Feels like G2 is one of those teams. But they're also pulling like Gwen bans and stuff. So it's hard because you feel like you're giving away a lot of priority picks over to G2. And you're not slowing them down because they have backup plans. Like, okay, we'll play the Yone or whatever, right? If that situation occurs. And giving Caps Silas is clearly quite dangerous, as it always has been.
I mean, the real answer, like Amazing just said, it's like on paper, you look at it and you see the answer immediately. They have the best historical mid jungle, historically and right now, but when they're at their peak. And then the other thing about those guys is they can also go. The joke is, if you watch this split, like the first week or so, first 2 weeks, actually they were all smurfing. Then Jankos had some terrible games in the middle of the split, but as you can see, by the end of the split, he's right back to the top again. Like, it's looking awesome. And then if you're going into a playoff, and then not only are you the top seed, but you have the best jungle mid individually and together. Like, come on, man. Like, what do you want? Like, that's the formula to win the LEC. It's the formula to be a champion in this region. It'll always be, by the way, a spoiler. It just always will be.
No, it is the most surefire way, right? Like, you literally have every lane to play towards then too. Open up mid lane. And it's like, and people just have to accept Jankos inting. Like, this guy is a fucking, like, he started playing when I started playing, which was basically season 2, and then we got into the league together in season 4, right? The man is fucking old. Let him in a couple. Let him into a couple of games, man. Like, he doesn't like when you see Jankos and Caps play. Do you really believe that they think about the regular season as something like very, very important? They think about it as like, well, we do want to have a good enough seed, right? But it's more about getting to shape, because they already proved last split that they don't need to be first seed in order to win the split, right? They don't need to do that. It's all about getting to playoffs, making sure that you have like a decent standing, I guess. Like being top 4 is probably like is the minimum. So they kind of have like their at least like one round they can choose in, and that's that. And then you still have the salty run back of potentially just dropping to the losers bracket and then going back up, right? So why be so scared about like their performance come mid split? They just judge them by the end of it, and it's fine. And it seems to be that at least now, especially with Dylan, which I think is an upgrade over Grabs, like, because I think Dylan is like really, really smart when it comes to not just pick bans, because I think the way that the pick bans were structured on Grabs was also pretty good, but it's more about incentivizing the niche picks on certain players and maybe even kind of bringing them towards that and nudging them into those directions is what makes Dylan great. Like, and I think he's an exceptional fit for that specific roster, because every one of the players has a lot of versatility, even Flackhead, and they all have champions that they can play in matchups that they can play, that they can think of, that they might not actively think about all the time, but he brings back into play. So I don't know, like I think they will likely actually just win the split again, just because every other team looks so fucking bad by comparison, besides Mad Lions, I guess. Where Mad Lions is the only team where I'm like, man, Mad Lions, if they play at their best, they could probably take 2 games off G2, but it's hard for me to see that third game coming in.
Basically, the classic meme where it's a panel from like a Silver Age, so like 70s era Batman comic, and it's where Robin's coming over, and Robin is everyone else in the LEC, right? They're all going like, but the middle of the split was a bit dodgy, and the hangover after MSI, and the draft got lost a little bit, and plus like Flackhead is still a rookie, and Broken Blade looked a little bit dodgy on the all the time. Like, they say all that stuff, right? And then the Batman slapping the Robin in the face is just going, yeah, it was a Caps in playoffs. And that's basically, that's the this split. That's how it's going to go. That's how it was last split, and that's how it's going to go this split. There you go.
But it's so interesting to see Caps like in a different surrounding, right? When he was on G2 last year and the year prior, right? Like, especially like when Wunder and Mickey kind of like lost. Honestly, Wunder and Mickey especially lost their edge, right? And they weren't as random anymore. They weren't as playmaking anymore, and they were more marker focused. Caps looked really bad at times. Like he looked like he didn't want to play, or he didn't want to watch him play. It wasn't like Caps. It was just a player, like kind of like Fake on. I'd say similar to Fake out on this year's T1 roster, where he was more of a macro piece than he was like an individual player, right? Could sometimes win laning phase, but it wasn't like an active choice to do so. It was more like randomly happening. And now it seems to be that he's actually making the active choice. Well, I'm the guy, and I'm gonna make things happen. And every single player around him kind of does the same thing for themselves too, right? Broken Blade is not egoistic, but he plays to win the game, right? For himself. Junkers does this at all times too, right now, where he's looking for the enemy jungle, he's looking for plays all over the map, and he's trying to win the game on his own. And I think this G2 right now is like, in terms of like their individual playstyle, is more like the 2019 G2 than they're like the 2021 like or 2020 almost like dying G2. And I'm actually pretty happy to say that.
Well, I think what I think about was fun about this meta too is that it feels like people might complain like, oh, there are these scaling compositions, but it's not that early game styles or these really aggressive teams can't actually perform at a high level. Like you see teams that have fallen into this niche of just playing ultra aggro do very well. Like look at Live Sandbox. It's basically powered them to a top 3 finish within LCK. Like Gen G is similar, although I would say Gen G kind of plays both ways. Live Sandbox is very much just like pedal to the metal. We're picking Vi, and G2 has now, I think, fallen into playing more of that style. And T1 has also fallen into playing more of that style right now. And Excel, like I said, I was shocked that Excel was able to pull it off in the game in which they played against Vitality, but it is very, very viable for you just to completely dominate a game and snowball it out. It's riskier because you can make fewer mistakes, but it's also obviously a lot easier to play the early game. So the power is balanced in that way. And I think G2 has realized that they can do this now, and that is something that has served them quite well, and it served many teams quite well. So I don't actually see this meta as particularly boring. I think there's quite a bit of versatility. I don't think that it's reflected necessarily in the mid-lane champion pools, but I think there is a pretty good amount of diversity if you're willing to take it in top and bot lane right now. Like, it's not really in jungle either, but in top and bot lane, like, there's a lot of different shit you can play. Yeah,
we saw Yasuo, for example. SK playing Yasuo is, insane to me, but he can actually play these champions, right? You can, Renata is like one of the few deniers, I would say. There's like almost like a neutralizer to a lot of potential like bot lane interactions. But other than that, once Renata is out, like Braum has played, Leona's played, Nautilus has played, Yuumi has played, Nami is played, and then you have like Lulu is being played. Like the supports alone, like already are a lot bigger sample size than you have, for example, in the spring split, where it was basically just melee supports and Yuumi. That was it. Right, There's not much else going on. So the sample size is like, or the amount of champions that you can play is very high, and it's also that the game is not stale based upon like what junglers have to do. And I think it's usually a good indicator of how the meta is going to shift and how it's going to be. Is like how much junglers are tied to farming. Right, junglers right now, you can make the argument that some junglers have to farm, but
Eternal can just run at you at level 2, so.
Yeah, Poppy can do the same. Poppy flashing over the wall, like stealing your camps. You have to be on time, right? Like every jungler has a lot of like tempo in the game. They're quick to make plays, and once they make plays, these are impactful. So you have to be on point with the execution. So like
even when you I would say even when you see junglers that are not like Skarner, right? That's not going to be doing a lot of ganking early. It's still interesting because usually those happen because there have been 5 or 6 jungle bans within the game, and like some games the pool just gets super pinched, right? But in those cases, a lot of other power picks are left up, which kind of makes the game interesting in and of itself. And Skarner is actually a fun champion to watch in the mid and late game once he hits 6. And also, it opens up a lot of other weird picks, because if you know that a lot of the early game power has gone out, that's when you see, you know, Damwon pulling out Karthus, right? Like then weird shit starts to happen, and it becomes entertaining in its own way.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is. I mean, I usually complain about the meta because I'm a salty bastard anyway. But this meta is one of the few where I feel like that the game for a lot of players has opened up greatly, and I think it is reflected in G2 style. And I think G2, like, to bring it back, is like whenever they had a meta where it was stay late game comps, right? Where it's like jungler was tied to farming, you had to hit certain item spikes, certain level spikes at certain points. Otherwise, you're going to lose the Herald fight, you're going to lose the Drake fight, and lose this, the potential to actually like snowball at all. And then they were always on the back foot, and they always seemed awkward at doing it. They were never the type of team that was like maybe reminiscent of like CLG or whatever it is, right? They're always the team that was creative and try to make plays around their innate strengths in every lane. And every single one of the players was able to shot call. And I think this meta is like as well fitting for the roster as it can be. It should also be well fitting for Fnatic, but you know, they can, you know.
Listen to more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content. Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.